Well, thank you very much for having me here. I am a Suffolk boy, born and bred, but I didn't get into wildlife and conservation until I went to university in Durham. So it's great to come back and hear about everything that I was missing, especially the bats, which are very close to my heart. So I'm here to talk to you today about a project I've been doing over the past 3 years. This is a sort of a hobby project that I've been doing in my spare time. And it's really a story of what you can do when a couple of guys come together and have a crazy idea and just go with it and see if it will work out. So hopefully I'm going to take you to an interesting story about our exploration of using drones as a tool for surveying bats. And you can make a judgment at the end as to whether you think it was worthwhile or not. So this project is a collaboration between myself and my friend Tom. Yes, two Toms, rather confusing. I'm Tom August. My experience with bats is a PhD. I did a PhD in bats, their ecology. In Whiton Wood was my study site. Some of you might be aware of. It's just outside Oxford. A very well-studied field site. That PhD was with Exeter University and Fiona Matthews there. And I'm now currently a researcher in technology and citizen science based at the National Biological Records Centre in Wallingford. Tom is a drone enthusiast. He did an MSc in biochemistry, but now works in property. But in his spare time, he tinkers around with drones. The project has an interesting starting point. Tom and I were at a wedding of two friends of ours, Andy and Michelle. They're friends of ours from university. Tom and I went to university together in Durham. And after a few drinks, more than a few drinks perhaps, Tom and I had a very enthusiastic conversation about how I could put my bat detector on his drone and single-handedly solve all problems in bat research. The next morning, it still sounded like a plausible project plan, so we forged ahead. And we set up our project, which we called Project Erebus. The aim of the project was quite simple. Can you combine bat detectors and drones to create a tool that is useful for bat research and bat conservation? And no was a very acceptable answer, as far as we were concerned. We proceeded with an open science philosophy. So typically research at an academic institution, you win a grant, you get some money, you work on a project for 3 years, and at the end you publish your results. We were doing this out of our garage, so we decided to do it a little bit differently. We put everything we did, every step of everything we did on our website, on our blog, published all our results, how-tos, as we went along. And the reason we did that was so that it was out there, it was accessible if anyone wanted to do similarly themselves. But also we wanted the community to get involved in the project. We wanted people to be feeding back ideas and helping out. And that proved to be a really crucial decision, and you'll see why later. So what are drones? Typically when you say the word drones, people think of two things. They think of the US military Reaper drones designed to kill people from a great distance, and recreational drones. These sort of drones you can buy for sort of a few £100. They carry a camera, often bought for kids. Can I get a show of hands of anyone who had heard of those two uses of drones before this talk? Okay, that's pretty much everyone. Fantastic. These drones are being used in a range of new and innovative ways. Boats can be drones, and they can be used for monitoring water quality. In the top right there, you've got Amazon's idea of a drone delivering parcels, as if next day isn't fast enough. They can be used out in sort of Africa, I think this is, sort of DIY, kind of low-tech drone. And you can have submersible drones as well, down there in the bottom right. Drones are being used in conservation. You can use, and typically it's based around imagery, so you can use cameras on drones in the top left here to create very accurate colony counts of birds, much more accurate than you can get from counts on the ground. You can count orangutan nests, and That's the picture on the top right here. Lots of pictures of orangutan nests. Much easier to see from above than from below. And who knew orangutans made nests? And the bottom left here is a drone used for poaching. Not for poaching, for monitoring of poachers, I should say. So this drone flies up and down along the fence line, checking the fence line for gaps and looking out for poachers. So can I get a show of hands of anyone who had heard of drones being used in conservation before I mentioned it? Okay, so that's good. That's good. Normally it's much less than that, but you're a highly educated audience, so that's fantastic. So let's have a little bit of a definition about what drones are. I've given you some examples. A drone has 3 component parts. It has a vehicle, and the vehicle can be any of a number of things. And you'll see examples of multi-rotors, planes, and boats today in my talk. It has a controller. This is an onboard computer which tells the drone what to do. It controls the flaps, the engine. It has a GPS in it. It knows the tilt of the aircraft. It has a compass, all these sorts of things. It's the brains of the drone. And the third thing you need is a computer which programs the brain. So it tells the brain what it's going to do on this flight. And that's typically, I want you to go to this waypoint, then this waypoint, then hang out at this altitude, then come back. That sort of thing. That's the sort of program that you would give to the brain. There we go. Okay, so let's move on now to our project and how we got on. So the first thing we did was we used Tom's quadcopter. Now, Tom already had this quadcopter. Voila. Quadcopter because it has 4 propellers, so it works just like a helicopter with these 4 propellers. You can get hexacopters, which have 6, and octocopters, which have 8. The benefit of having more propellers is that if one of them fails, it can still fly. If one of them fails, it unceremoniously comes to the ground. So that's a quadcopter. Tom already had this one built, so we used that in our first forays of this project. And the first question we wanted to answer was, how much ultrasound does a drone create? The whole idea of attaching the detector to the drone is to be able to hear the bats, which are also using ultrasound. If the drone produces a ton of ultrasound, game over on day 1. Well, it turns out that they do create quite a lot of ultrasound, particularly the quadcopter. The graph on the top right is showing you volume up the side and frequency along the bottom. So the high peaks, those are the ones we don't want. The different colored lines show you different distances from the drone. The low lines show you that if you move the detector away from the drone, it does get quieter. At about 3 meters, we decided was an acceptable level of quietness where we'd be able to record bats. The good thing is that ultrasound attenuates, i.e. gets quieter very quickly over distance. That's true of all high-frequency sounds. That's why you can always hear the bass sound coming through your wall from your noisy neighbor, because low-frequency sounds travel much further. So that's all worked to our advantage. The bottom right graph here is showing you a number of different propellers that we used. We figured different propellers probably create different amounts of noise. That was the case, so we were able to choose a quiet propeller as well. So how do we get our detector, and at this point we were going to be using a bat box duet. How do we get that 3 meters away from the drone? Well, we tie it with a bit of string that's 3 meters long. Okay, nothing particularly fancy. So here's our drone, and in this instance we're using a bottle of water to simulate the bat detector because I didn't want to risk my bat detector. And what you're seeing is a strange pendulum effect. Swings out of control. And it crashes. So that doesn't work. The reason that doesn't work is the heavy detector swings, and the drone is counterbalancing that, and it just makes it worse and worse and worse, accentuates it, until eventually the string of the detector got tangled in the propeller, and with one propeller down, you fall to the ground unceremoniously. You saw a brief glimpse of the back of Tom's head there as well. So we gave up on the quadcopter at that point, and we moved on to planes. So planes have a number of advantages over quadcopters. This is actually, you've already seen a picture of this drone in the Africa side. This is a Bixler. You can buy these cheap off the internet. They come from China, and they're very cheap. All the electronics go inside here. When you buy them, they have significantly less gaffer tape on them than this one does. They have a number of advantages. They generate their lift from their wings and forwards momentum, which makes them much more energy efficient. They can fly for longer, over greater distances, and they need less battery power inside. So that's all good. You'll see from the picture on the right that should not be in two pieces. That should be in one piece. We did have a few problems with this drone. I think I have a video of, yeah. So here's a picture. We attached. I'll let this play first. This is testing over some big fields. We just wanted to test this plane worked. We've got it flying just great. So I said, let's put a camera on the back and we can get a really nice video and we can use that in talks and stuff. What I hadn't done is I forgot to recalibrate the plane because the center of gravity moved way back. So I put this camera on the back, so it crashed into the cornfield. But thankfully that cushioned its landing. So the detector I mounted on the side of this aircraft. So I had my duet attached on one side with the cable going underneath and my recorder on the other side. Obviously, that's quite close to propeller. We know the propeller is creating lots of ultrasound. So what we get is this, a huge amount of noise. You're not going to hear anything else other than the motor from that recording. So completely hopeless. We thought, well, maybe you can glide. If you glide, then obviously your plane's making no noise, and that solves your problem. So in the bottom right-hand corner, this is the track of our flight that we tested out gliding. The plane rises from left to right on the nearest sort of transect, and it comes around the top on the right-hand side, and then glides down that back straight. And you can see that represented again in the height profile in the image above. And what we got was noise when the engine's running, then quiet as you cut it off and come into a glide, and then we had an artificial ultrasound noise maker, and that's the pips recorded there. So this works. The problem is there's no programming software out there anywhere which can tell a plane how to glide. The controlling software which controls these drones, that's not something anyone's ever thought anyone would need to do. So we'd have to write that ourselves, and that's beyond both of our skills. So at this point, things weren't looking too good. Then we had a bit of a breakthrough, and this comes back to our sort of open science philosophy. One of the people on the UK Backworkers Facebook group heard about our project, and it was Peter Flory at Pearsonic, and he was working on this, which is a very small, lightweight bat detector. Lightweight bat detectors aren't really needed. People go out, you do your transect on foot. It doesn't matter if your bat detector is this size or this size. But for us, it's really crucial. And Peter was kind enough to donate to us one of his early models that we began to use. On a bit of a side note, you can now get this as a bat detector, which we were also given. This actually didn't work out so well for us, but in a passing note, I want to say these things also. It's called an audio moth, if you want to look it up. Anyway, so Peter gave us this, and this was a real game changer for us. So on the plane, what we could do, you might be able, I'll point it out, you might not be able to see it so well, but we've mounted the detector on the end of the wing. It's just here. That means we can get a greater distance away from the motor, which is what's generating our noise, and hopefully we can get some better recordings. Oh, there's a close-up picture of my smirk. We don't want to see that anymore. Go away. There we go. So we tested that setup out in the field, and it worked really well with the artificial call, so the bottom left. There's no longer that massive purple of loud noise from the motor. Now we've just got that sort of quieter yellow smudge. The yellow smudge is at around 30 to 35 kilohertz. So it is an inconvenient place for myotis bats, but for pips and stuff, we'd be okay. And our artificial ultrasound source could be picked up quite nicely. This was right at the end of, I think, 2016. And we really wanted to get a recording of a real wild bat on our system. And the same day we were out testing with the artificial source, I heard a real bat as it came to the end of the day, and I thought, well, let's fly it around and let's get a recording. And this, I swear to God, this is a bat. But I don't think many people in the audience are going to be convinced. So we were sort of really excited. I mean, this would have been the first ever recording of a bat from a drone, but yeah, it doesn't really hold up in the court, I don't think. So in the interim, now that we have a lightweight detector, we can get around the pendulum problem that we had with the quadcopter. So we could revisit that setup. So on a friend's stag do, Tom and I skipped the pre-drink session and went out in the evening and flew again, it was, I believe it was this quadcopter again. You can see the picture of the quadcopter on the far right there. It's got big lights on it so you can see where it is at night. And we flew a little transect around the garden of the house we were staying in. And over these trees in the corner, we had some pips hanging out, and we got these really nice recordings. So this is the first records ever of bats from a quadcopter. So we're really, really excited about that. That worked. Come the next year, we thought about making a boat. I mean, why not? We'd done the rest. I think if we'd given it some thought, we probably would have started with the boat first. So this is Princess, bought from a model shop. It's obviously an imitation speedboat, which is important. I'll come on to why in a minute. Boats have a much better system to work with. We could survey Daubenton's over lakes and along rivers where it's hard to get detectors to. If it stops working, it just sits there, doesn't crash, doesn't disassemble rapidly. It can generate very little noise because it can just poodle along at very slow speed, creating no ultrasound. So why we didn't start with a boat, I don't know. But yeah, this is a much more viable option. We got some great results. We drove it up and down the Thames. We drove it up and down the Thames where I do my waterways survey for the BCT national surveys. We got some lovely Myotis calls and some pips, and we got some seroutines as well. Great, the boat's great. The problem with this boat in specifically, is that it's a speedboat, which means it's designed to go very fast, and it turns at speed. If it's going very slowly, this boat can't turn. Consequently, when we were taking it up and down the Thames at midnight, it turned very slowly into the far bank, and Tom had to get in the river and swim across to go and retrieve it. So we need a new design of boat, but the idea works. Okay. And I should say that the software that controls this is the exact same software that controls the plane and controls the quadcopter. That's sort of auto flights, all the same stuff. And it's all free and open to use, that software. So where are we now? There's a second generation of drones now, which I haven't brought with me because my car was full enough with these ones, and they're a bit big. We have a new quadcopter, which is a bit bigger than this one. It's got bigger propellers, and it's got a much bigger battery, and it was all custom built by Tom out of sort of carbon fiber and all this sort of stuff. So it's very light. That means it can fly for a long time. It's got very big propellers. That means they can revolve more slowly and they produce less noise, less ultrasound noise. Big battery, that means it can fly for longer as well. And then we've got a new plane as well, which is something called a Talon. It's actually a Lockheed Martin design. They design military drones, which was at some point stolen by the Chinese and then bought by us very cheaply on the internet. It has these big wings. It's maybe half again the wingspan of our plane that I've got here. Can fly quite slowly, very efficient flight time up to 2 hours. And the propeller on that is right at the very back. You probably can't see it from that image. But the propeller is actually on the tail here, pointing like this. And then what we do is we attach a rod to the front and then the microphone's here. So we really extend that distance between the propeller and the microphone. And I can show you some results from these. We took the quadcopter, the new one, to the National Trust down Scotney Castle, south of London. And we did 3 transects. You can see those hopefully in that bottom right image there. And we didn't have, there sadly weren't too many bats when we were there. It was quite a windy night. But we did get some myotis calls, and you can see them in the top right. And they came out really, really clearly. We were really happy that the level of noise, interference noise we're getting from that quadcopter is minimal. So we can pick up the bats really quite clearly. So we're really, really happy with that. We're also happy that it was a myotis, because I said that's the trouble species. The frequency of their call passes straight through the noisy bit produced by the drones. But you can quite clearly see that the noise, which you might just be able to pick out as a yellow smudge going across there horizontally, doesn't really get in the way of being able to see that bat call. We had to go with the plane. Again, this was on the Thames, where I do my waterway survey. Best waterway survey in the UK. Tons and tons of bats there every time I go. And there's this long bend in the Thames. This is nice and wide, and it's got about a 300-meter straight line. So from where this, on the left, this picture, from where it's taken to that boat is about 300 meters. So the idea was to fly a loop. So we fly on the right-hand side, flying away from you, down to the end. We do a U-turn, and then could descend down the river, then coming towards us, and at the very end, rising up over the trees, and then turning around again, this sort of oval shape. As I said, it's about 300, or just over 300 meters long, this stretch along the river that we were surveying. And the plane was flying at about 4.5 meters off the water's surface. We didn't want to be plowing through the Daubenton's, so we flew above where they were going to be. And again, we've got some really nice results here. Loads of Daubentons and some Ceratines. The call's very loud, because obviously we're quite close to the bats. The bats are on the water's surface. And you can see the echoes. You see each of these calls comes in pairs, because the call from the bat is bouncing off the water, as well as coming directly to the microphone on the plane. More noise, though. That yellow smudge from left to right is much larger. The engine on that plane is quite powerful. So it does produce quite a bit of noise. So that's something we probably need to tweak with and work with in the future. But certainly for this purpose, it worked quite well. The recorder that we're using, this again is the same one that we're using on all of them, all of our drones, has an acoustic trigger, so it will just record a file when it hears something. It recorded 500 files on this flight. I think that's mainly it was getting triggered by the engine noise. So again, that's something we'd need to work on as well. The plane could have flown that for 2 hours. It could have done that, 30, 40 times that loop over that waterway. We didn't. We did it for about 10 times, but the capacity's there. So something I haven't really talked about, but I always get asked about, quite rightly, is the disturbance issue. So how do we know that these drones aren't disturbing bats? One, because that would be illegal. We can't disturb a protected species. And two, it's going to bias your results if your drone is affecting the behavior of the bats you're trying to record. So there's two elements to the disturbance issue. There's physical disturbance. So we don't want bats going through the propellers of our drones, quite clearly. So we need to make sure that the drones are physically separated from where the bats are. So when we've been flying them, we've always kept them well above the tree canopy or above where the Daubenton's were flying on the river. The acoustic one is harder to tease apart. We know the drones are creating ultrasound, so if the bats can obviously hear the ultrasound, are they going to fly away from where the drones are? So therefore your data is going to be biased. Well, we know a lot about the ultrasound that the drones are making, because that was one of our key concerns. We know that after about 5 meters away, we can't detect the ultrasound on the drones. That doesn't mean that bats can't. So we set up a project with the University of East Anglia, and there's going to be a master's student looking more into the details of how, whether or not the presence of a drone affects bats' behavior. It's also worth dwelling a little bit on the legalities around the use of drones in the UK. You can't just fly a drone wherever you want to. That doesn't stop people from doing it. But you can't under the legal framework. You can't fly a drone within 50 meters of a person, vehicle, or building over which you don't have control. That's a safety thing. You can bring those people or vehicles and buildings under your control. You can do a leaflet drop, or you can talk to people as they're walking through the field. They then become under your control, and you're safe to proceed. You can't fly higher than 400 feet. Well, that's probably not an issue for us. We probably don't want to be flying much higher than that. You can't fly further than 500 meters away from yourself as the operator, or line of sight. You can't fly behind a building, for example. At nighttime, that's much reduced. Okay, you need to have control, so you're really talking about 100 meters at night. Also, if you're doing stuff commercially, so if you're a bat consultant and you wanted to use one of these things, you would need to get a permission for commercial operations. That's sort of like a license to operate, and that's a 2-day course and an exam with a sort of a teaching school. All of that doesn't stop young kids from flying drones over Heathrow Airport. Yeah. But what can you do? And what opportunities might there be for conservation? How can we apply this in conservation research, conservation science? I think there's a few questions we can answer with these drones that we can't currently answer. So surveying at height is clearly very difficult with current bat detectors. You can stick bat detectors on weather balloons, that's been done, or on very long poles, or on installations that are already at height. But you're still sort of very much limited in where you can record. So having a drone flying about, we can do a transect in the air at height, which would be useful for surveying over tree canopy. We know very little about what bats do above the tree canopy, how they forage, and which bats are present at what heights above the tree canopy. Surveying wind turbine heights, at wind turbines sites at height. That's a tongue twister. Clearly, we're interested in what bats are doing at height when we're talking about wind turbines, but it's very difficult to survey, as I've said. And simply researching behavior and migration of bats. So we heard a little bit about Nephusius pipistrelles being a migratory species. Presumably when bats migrate, they're migrating at height. So perhaps we can have some drones up there surveying for migrating species. In terms of systematic surveys, I think they have a lot to offer. So this image on the bottom right-hand side is a sort of dummy survey. But you can imagine you want to survey this woodland for bats. You can put this you can draw a polygon in the computer software, and it then creates this yellow path. So effectively, it's like a lawn, like you've got your lawnmower going up and down your garden. You'd have your drone flying up and down over the top of this forest. And your drone could complete this route in maybe 15 minutes. So it could do it 4 times on one battery. You can have several batteries out with you. You can do it over and over again all night long. Whereas if you were doing this on foot, you'd have to think about where you're going to walk through the wood, and you'd probably maybe do it just once, and then you can maybe come back you do it dawn and dusk perhaps, and come back several days. So you can cover a large area systematically and fairly quickly. It's also highly repeatable, because you could come back the next year or the next week, upload the same program to your drone, and it will fly exactly the same route at exactly the same speed. So it's very repeatable. And it allows you to do these surveys in areas which are inaccessible, so over water, over quarries, in dangerous areas, in areas that are just difficult to access on foot. So what's the future for our project? What's the future for the use of drones for bat research? Well, we probably still need to do a bit more testing. I think we've proven the proof of concept. We've proven that these 3 systems will work, and they will work in the real world. But we've only done small tests. What we need to do is find a big new wind turbine installation project where we can just go and fly our drones around and see how effective they are, compare them to the traditional ground surveys. That's sort of the next phase of what we need to do. Tom and I share the love about our project. We do talks and the blog and all those sorts of things, try and make people aware of what we do, and we help people who try and do sorts of things themselves. We're sort of very open about helping anyone. I should say that there's no money in any of this, apart from expenses. This is all out of our own pocket, and we're not planning to sell anything. And as I said, we have a project coming up with UEA looking at whether the presence of drones affects the behaviors of bats. And that'll be really key in whether this is something that could feasibly be adopted more widely. So that just leads me to thank a few people. Tom Tom, who obviously isn't here today, as well as Peter at Pearsonic, who gave us the breakthrough little bat detector, folks who helped us or allowed us to fly our drones on their sites, and a surprising number of commercial companies who were happy to give us stuff at a discounted price for building our drones. They obviously thought this was worthwhile. Loads of people on the UK Bat Workers Facebook group who gave us their thoughts and comments, and I felt like they were part of the project as well. If you want to get in touch, there'll be time for questions later, but you can also catch us on Twitter. This is our website, which has all the details on it, and on email. Thank you very much.